David, I saw some pictures of your wife in the arms of another man. They were pictures of them having sex. What? That's impossible. Masterson assured me. That's not all, David. The photos had different dates and times on them. This wasn't a one-off mistake. Your wife is having an affair with this man. I couldn't believe it. You must have made a mistake. It couldn't have been Anne. Why would Masterson lie to me? I don't know, David, but when he caught me with your file, he went ballistic and fired me on the spot. Why did he react that way if he had nothing to hide? Do you have copies of the photos? I need to see them for myself. The unexpected slap knocked me off balance, sending me stumbling backwards with my ears ringing. What on earth was that? I yelled, bewildered. Hold on, let me backtrack a few weeks and fill in some blanks, or none of this will make any sense. Entering the house through the garage, I made my way to the kitchen just after 4 p.m., my usual time off from work. Working for a company with clients in the UK meant starting my day at 7 a.m. to sync with their schedule. It took some adjusting, but now I appreciate the early start. Glancing at the bulletin board in the kitchen out of habit, I found only one note: working late. Another solitary dinner awaited me. Back when Anne and I were newlyweds in our tiny apartment, we used a chalkboard to coordinate our schedules. Even after moving into our house, we kept up the tradition. Initially, we'd leave each other sweet, awkward love notes. I vividly recall scribbling, "Can't wait to see you, Cookie. Miss you already," only to find her response later, "Miss you more. And stop calling me Cookie." The nickname originated from our first meeting at a bakery, and though Anne had outgrown it professionally, it was hard for me to let go. Yes, I know the notes and nicknames sound a bit syrupy, but they meant a lot to me, especially now that the syrup in our relationships seems to have lost its sweetness. These days, I'm lucky enough to find a terse note telling me what she'll be doing and when she'll be home, or like today, simply working late. I'm not naive. I know that even the most brilliant gems lose their luster over time, and routine and habit can dull the glow of new love. But for the past year, it seemed to me that more than just habit had changed in our relationship. It wasn't just that we'd stopped leaving each other love notes, it had gotten to the point where we hardly spent any time together. My work schedule, of course, was part of the problem. On weekdays, I left for the office long before she got out of bed. But her job compounded the problem. You see, Anne is a realtor, and while her office has regular hours, she is pretty much at the mercy of any seller or buyer wanting to make an offer on a house at 9 o'clock at night. Anne will come to you to help with the paperwork. Trying to sell your home? Anne will organize an open house that will keep her busy all afternoon on Saturday or Sunday. Basically, you get the idea. But that's not all. 2 years ago, Anne got it into her head that she was going to run for city council in our district. I tried my best to talk her out of it, but friends and associates kept encouraging her. I wasn't worried at the time because our longtime council member had gotten 2/3 of the vote in the last election. But halfway through this campaign, his wife suffered a stroke, and he withdrew from the election to take care of her. Before I realized what was happening, my wife had taken her seat on the city council. This, of course, led to a whole new set of responsibilities. It wasn't just the monthly council meetings, soon Anne was meeting with constituents, serving on task forces, and doing all the things that elected officials do. For crying out loud, when I stood with her on the platform at the hotel on election night when she won re-election, I was proud of her and her success. When I saw how happy she was in her new responsibilities, I was happy for her, but as the weeks went by, our time together dwindled. When I tried to broach the subject, she became defensive, accusing me of jealousy and lack of support. All of this would have been bad enough, but over the past year, I'd noticed a change in her attitude. It wasn't just that she'd grown colder toward me. Lately when we spent time together, I felt a condescending attitude toward her, bordering on contempt. It wasn't anything overt, of course, it was just the way I felt. When I had some free time, I thought a lot about the situation. You won't be surprised to learn that it put me in a bad state of mind. I worried about the loss of time spent with her and resented the demands that had come between us. I still remember one evening when we were infatuated with each other. We had just retired to the bedroom when the phone rang. You guessed it, it was one of her real estate clients with an emergency she had to handle. Even today, that incident still haunts me. But to be honest, I also remember the time I had to cancel our weekend plans when one of my company's biggest clients had a network outage. Now I was sitting at the kitchen table trying to make sense of it all. Maybe I wasn't being fair to her, and maybe I'm just jealous because other people need so much of her time. But as a network engineer, I have developed the ability to identify problems from seemingly insignificant symptoms. My intuition told me that it wasn't just the factors I had considered so far, and it wasn't just our crazy schedules that made me so uncomfortable. I realized it was about her attitude toward me. When she first became a councilwoman, she had been so eager to tell me about everything that was going on in the council and the mayor's office. But now, she didn't bring them up anymore. Maybe it was just that the newness had worn off, or maybe she had decided that I just wasn't worth talking to. It was a possibility that kept me on my toes. Suddenly, I had a truly dark thought: what if she was having an affair? I immediately dismissed the abominable idea. My cookie would never cheat on me. But I couldn't get the thought out of my head because it seemed to answer many of the questions I had. What was she really doing all those nights she was working late? She could have been seeing clients, but she could also, I realized, have been seeing her lover. Why didn't she tell me where she was going anymore? Was it because she just didn't care, or because she didn't want me to know? Why was she so condescending to me when we were together? Did she despise me now that I was her unwilling cuckold? The longer I sat there thinking, the more I felt an angry suspicion come over me. I had to do something to stop this train of thought before I did something stupid and irreversible. So I got up from my desk, put on my old work clothes, then got out the lawnmower and started working on our lawn until it was too dark to see any further. The physical exercise helped a little. I still couldn't help but think about the situation, but I had calmed down enough to develop a plan of action. When problems start on the network, the first thing I do is run a series of tests to determine the cause. I need to do the same with my marriage, run diagnostics and find out what went wrong. Over a dinner of leftovers, I pondered what diagnostic tools I could use. I was well aware of the many electronic marvels that could easily be used to spy on someone, but the more I thought about it, the more complicated the problem became. Sure, I could set up microphones and cameras around the house, but with her spending so little time at home, it was unlikely to do anything useful. I was concerned about the time she spent out of the house. I thought about putting a beacon on her car, but what good would that do? Between real estate shows and city council meetings, my wife was on the road most of the time, parking at a hotel. She was constantly attending luncheons and holding meetings in hotel conference rooms. Miniature recording devices tried to tap every cell phone she used. It was nothing to be alarmed about. I knew the answer, but I didn't want to use it because I thought it would be expensive. However, hiring a professional was clearly the right decision. So, I sat down at the computer and typed detective agencies into the search engine. That didn't help, there were dozens of them. Some had ratings, but I'm pretty skeptical of online ratings and user recommendations. It's too easy to fabricate them. Does Craigslist have a section for detective agents? Angie's List. Damn. Next in my search, I noticed an entry about a Channel 9 news story. Clicking on it, I discovered that a year ago, they did a report on local detective agencies. Channel 9, ha. I went to high school with Amy Howard, the girl who is now the news director at that channel. We even dated in college. It was nothing serious, but we parted as friends. I called her. Hey, Amy, long time no see. Any chance of having a beer with me tonight after work? She was pleasantly surprised to hear from me. I think I can make it, Dave. It's a slow news day, so unless something special happens, I'll be there. When she walked into the living room, I remembered why I was interested in her. She was still as attractive as when we'd met, but now she had the confident style of a successful professional. It suited her well. We chatted for a while, discussing mutual friends and our lives after college, but eventually, I discreetly changed the subject. Didn't you recently do an article on local detective agencies? She looked at me shrewdly. Oh, Dave, I'm so sorry. I was wondering why you didn't mention it. Are you looking for references? Gotcha. I hung my head and nodded. She paused to think. Given your wife's position in the city, I'd stay away from the big agencies. The fact that they have more employees only increases the likelihood of someone gossiping. Does that make sense? Definitely. And you probably don't want a one-man store because getting what you need in a timely manner can be a problem. It's difficult for the owner to do more than one or two things at the same time. I nodded, that made sense too. If you're looking for something in between, we've had good feedback about Masterson Agency. It's not the cheapest store in town, but the clients we talked to said they're thorough, professional, and get results in a reasonable amount of time. She paused. Dave, the private detective business is, by its nature, a bit scrappy, but you could do a lot worse than going to Masterson. It seemed good to me, and I thanked her. But as I got up to leave, she reached across the table and squeezed my palm. It was good to see you, Dave. I hope things work out for you. Keep me posted. I promised her I'd do it. As I drove home, I thought about our conversation. Damn, how I wanted to keep my marital problems a secret. I hoped Amy would be discreet. The next day, her recommendation still made sense to me, so I called the Masterson Agency to make an appointment. As luck would have it, the woman I spoke to said I could meet with Mr. Masterson himself if I showed up first thing in the morning. I'll be there, I promised. Fortunately, Anne got home on time that evening, and we had dinner together for the first time in days. Given what I was about to do, I was nervous about having to make conversation with her, but I needn't have worried. She spent the entire evening ranting about the arrogance of some businessman who was thinking of running against her in the next election. I didn't have to say much or play much. The next morning, I got up early and skipped breakfast so I wouldn't be late for my appointment. After leaving a note for Anne on the bulletin board, I got in my car and drove downtown. To my surprise, the traffic was free, and I arrived earlier than I expected. I checked the Masterson Agency's address again and realized it was near my favorite coffee shop, Stranger Brew. When this establishment opened, 10 years ago, there was a lot of talk about the name and what it meant. Some thought it reflected a unique blend of house beers, others or the new owner was a former hippie with a sense of humor. But Anne checked the records at City Hall and found that the owner's name is Joe Stranger. Anyway, Stranger Brew, as I understand it, had every advantage over the big coffee house chains. Apparently, I wasn't the only one who liked the place. Even at such an early hour, I was lucky enough to find an empty seat when I got there. As I sat there sipping my coffee and eating my breakfast sandwich, more and more customers came in. Suddenly, there was a commotion at the table next to me, and I looked up to see a large, red-faced man yelling at a young Latino woman sitting alone. "You're not done yet. What gives you the right to take a table when other people want to sit down?" The young woman sat silent, clearly stunned by the man's sudden outburst. This seemed to enrage her accuser even more. "You're a goddamn Mexican, aren't you? I bet you're a goddamn wetback. First, you come and take our jobs away from us, and now you're taking a table in my cafe. Why don't you swim home across the Rio Grande where you belong?" He reached out and slid his hand across the table, spilling coffee all over the floor. Before I knew it, I was between the woman's table and the man's table. "Why don't you leave her alone? She was here before you, and she has every right to this table. You should buy her another cup of coffee and apologize for insulting her." The man's face grew even redder, and I tensed, expecting him to lash out at me. But his gaze suddenly shifted to something behind me, and when I turned around, I saw the owner standing there. Joe Stranger wasn't a big guy, but he had a sawed-off pool cue in his hands. "You," he bellowed at my antagonist. "Get out of my store and don't come back. You have no right to bully one of my customers, and I sure as hell don't want your business." I thought the man might decide to pick a fight after all, but he looked at Joe's pool cue, then at me, and finally decided not to risk it. "Okay," he called out as he walked out of the coffee shop. "I'm glad to leave, this place sucks anyway." When the noise subsided, I turned to the shocked woman. "I'm so sorry about this, miss. Can I get you another cup?" The woman looked at me shyly. "You don't know me? Why did you do that?" I shrugged. "I don't know. I guess I hate bullies and bigots." She smiled and held out her hand. "I am Maria Elena Alvarez, and I am very grateful for what you have done. There are many who do not feel what you feel, and even fewer who are willing to step in to help a stranger. You're welcome, Maria Elena. I'm David Davis, and I'm glad I could help." At that moment, Joe returned with 2 cups of coffee. "I brought a fresh cup for each of you. I apologize for what happened, and I hope you feel comfortable coming here in the future." We assured him we'd be back, and then Maria looked at me. "Would you like to have coffee with me? It will free up your table for others if you don't mind the company." "I'd love to join you," I said as I sat down next to her, and we started chatting, sipping from steaming paper cups. She shook her head sorrowfully. "I ended up here completely by accident. I'm starting a new job nearby, and I got here early because I didn't want to be late for my first day," she explained, taking another sip and looking at me. "Do you come here often?" "Not as often as I'd like, actually. I have a personal business meeting first thing today, and I didn't want to be late," I replied. She nodded, then looked at her watch. "Actually, I should probably get going," she said, standing up and holding out her hand. "Thanks again, David, for coming to my rescue. It was a pleasure meeting you, and I won't forget what you did." I shook her hand and watched her walk out the door. Taking another sip of coffee, I decided it was time to hit the road myself. Leaving the coffee shop, I headed down the sidewalk toward the Masterson Agency address. Looking up, I noticed Maria walking ahead of me in the same direction. When she stopped at a stoplight, I caught up with her at the intersection. She noticed me, smiled, and nodded. After crossing the street and walking a little more, she looked back and saw me following her. She frowned. "Damn, I don't want her to think I'm following her," I thought to myself. Then, to my horror, she entered the lobby of the same building where I was headed. I deliberately waited a little longer, hoping that when I entered, she would be gone. But when I opened the door, I saw her standing in the lobby with her arms folded and a concerned look on her face. As I hesitantly approached her, she said, "I really appreciate what you did at the cafe, but that doesn't mean you have the right to." No, I interrupted. "I promise I won't follow you, at least not intentionally. It's just that I have an appointment in this building." She looked at me skeptically, then turned and walked toward the elevators. I followed her, and when the door opened, I got in too. She pressed the fourth floor button and then turned to me questioningly. "I'm going to the fourth floor," I told her helplessly. She frowned again but said nothing. I backed up when she came out on the fourth floor, but she started walking down the hallway toward the Masterson agency. As I slowly followed her, she turned around and frowned suddenly. As we approached the door to the agency, a look of understanding appeared on her face, and the frown dissipated. She stopped in front of the door labeled Employee Entry and turned to me. "Good luck with your business, David." "I understand now," she said. I nodded at her. "Thank you, and good luck with your new job, Maria." When I walked into the agency's main entrance, all I could think was, damn, she must know why I'm here today. Now I had two people who knew I needed a detective. After I gave my name to the receptionist, I was not immediately ushered into Bradley Masterson's office. I didn't know how well the agency was doing, but at least I had a senior specialist, and that was something. If anyone matched the last name Masterson, it was him. He definitely looked masterful. My height is just above average, and when he stood, I looked up at him. Not only that, but he was built like a midfielder. I felt a little intimidated. As soon as we shook hands and I began to explain why I had come to see him, he quickly put me at ease with his professionalism. He skillfully guided me through a series of questions about my wife, my suspicions, her habits, and a number of other factors I might not have thought of. This guy really knows his stuff, I thought to myself. After half an hour of discussion, he leaned back in his chair. "The fact that your wife is a member of the council actually makes the job a little easier. She's used to being in public and having strangers around her. Surveillance shouldn't be a problem." A warning bell rang in my mind. Your men must be careful. If it becomes known that I'm following her, it could cause a major political scandal. He smiled like a used car salesman. "Mr. Davis, we pride ourselves on our discretion and professionalism. Your wife and her entourage will have no idea that she is under surveillance." I still wasn't convinced. "So what methods will you use? Audio, video, GPS tracking?" He leaned forward, crossed his arms, and gave me a piercing stare. "I won't answer your question because I don't want you looking for watchers or devices. I've had clients who lost weeks of work when they accidentally alerted their spouse." Then he frowned. "Also, I don't want you trying to conduct surveillance on your own. For the next 2 weeks, you are to stick to your normal routine, and behave perfectly normally in the presence of your wife. We're professionals. We don't need help, and we sure as hell don't need amateurs getting in the way. Do I make myself clear?" I leaned back in my chair. "Absolutely." And then the other thing he said hit me. "You said 2 weeks. Do you think you can get what you need in just 2 weeks?" He relaxed and gave me another of his smiles. "You told me that you've really noticed a change in your wife's behavior over the past 6 months. That leads me to believe that if she is indeed having an affair, it is in its hottest phase. She wants to see him or her as often as she can. At the same time, she's already convinced she's getting away with it. I really expect that we will be able to give you a definitive answer a week from this Friday. At the very least, we will be able to let you know of any suggestive behavior that requires further investigation." I couldn't help but be impressed. This man not only had the necessary skills for the job but also had a pretty good grasp of human nature. I think I had chosen the right diagnostic tool for the job. "Okay, I'm convinced. So how much is all this going to cost?" Without blinking an eye, he gifted me with a figure that made me wince. "I know it sounds like a lot," he continued calmly, "but remember, we'll be using multiple people, vehicles, and expensive electronic equipment. More importantly, we will give you answers. You've already told me how uncertainty plagues you. How much is your peace of mind worth? He was right. I pulled out my checkbook. For the next 2 weeks, I felt very uncomfortable. I had never paid attention to myself, so I didn't know what my norm was. Do I look suspicious? Am I showing too much interest in my wife? Am I asking too many questions or not enough? But it soon became obvious that it didn't matter how I acted around her. Anne treated me with the same indifference she had shown for months. When I tried to ask her about her job, she acted as if she were doing me a favor by answering. It was also obvious that she thought I wouldn't understand her work on the board anyway. I felt more like an irritant than her husband. The following weekend, trying to show interest, I suggested we go out. Tonight? I needn't have bothered. She immediately brushed it off. I have open houses on Saturday and Sunday, and you know how they always exhaust me. Damn. We may have lived in the same house, but we were more like neighbors than husband and wife. I was tormented by memories of what our life together had been like. We had so much in common, so many common interests and favorite activities. I remember sitting together and talking for hours about our dreams and how we could fulfill them. Most painful was the memory of how passionately we loved each other. We would pass each other in the hallway, and the next moment find ourselves intertwined in each other's arms, desperate to quench our desire. Where did all that love and passion go? Ironically, the closer we got to our dreams, the more we drifted apart. I realized that I was passionate about my career not only because of the financial rewards but also because I found my work intellectually stimulating. Again I wondered, had I played a role in pushing her away? But if I did, I felt Anne was just as much to blame. She was a good realtor, but she had always wanted more. Being elected to the council had been a dream come true for her, and lately, she had started hinting at running for mayor. I couldn't understand why she was never satisfied with what she had. The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that our career paths had contributed to the current state of affairs in our marriage. But even with all the stress, a little voice in my head kept warning me that there was something more I was overlooking. Was I being paranoid, or was there a real threat? As much as I hated spying on Anne, I decided I was doing the right thing. Masterson was right, peace of mind was worth a lot. All in all, these 2 weeks I felt like a patient scheduled for exploratory surgery. I was scared to death of what would be discovered, but I couldn't wait for it to be over. Before the meeting, I stopped by Stranger Brew for my favorite coffee, a prisoner's last meal. Sitting there, I looked around, wanting to see if Maria Elena was there, but she wasn't. Thankfully, the bigot I'd run into didn't show up either. Finally, it was time. I walked the 3 blocks to Masterson's agency like a condemned man walking the Green Mile. While I was giving my name to the receptionist, Masterson startled me by coming out and walking me back to his office. Oh, this can't be good news. He sat down and placed his hands solemnly on the folder on his desk, his face turned into a mask. I couldn't stand the tension any longer. So what's the verdict? What did you find? Instead of answering, he slid the folder toward me. I think it's best if you see for yourself, he muttered, and my heart fluttered in my chest. I hesitantly opened the folder and picked up the first photograph. It showed my wife standing outside a house I had never seen, holding the door open for a young couple. In the corner of the photo, I could see a barely visible for sale sign. I quickly picked up the next picture. It was obviously taken from the visitors' gallery and showed Anne sitting in her seat in the council chamber. Below it was a picture of her talking with Mayor Dewey in the hallway of City Hall. After that was a picture of Anne walking through the door of her real estate agency. Confused, I hastily flipped through the rest of the photos in the folder. Each of them looked perfectly harmless, exactly as I'd expected my wife to look. When I looked at Masterson in confusion, his grim face was replaced by a wide grin. "Mr. Davis, I'm happy to report that your wife is not cheating on you. Not only has she not gone sneaking off to a lover, but she has observed absolutely no behavior that we would consider even remotely suspicious." He leaned back in his chair and put his hands behind his head in a pose of relaxation. "Your wife, Mr. Davis, is multifaceted. She's a dedicated elected official, she's a busy and successful realtor, she's a driven woman. But I can assure you without reservation that she is not an unfaithful wife." Then his face took on a more serious expression. "I know you had questions about her, and I suspect the last 2 weeks have been very difficult for you. But now you can put all those doubts and fears out of your mind and focus on enjoying your marriage." He gave a friendly smile. "Most of the time, my job is to give husbands or wives terrible news about their spouse. I really like it when I get to break some good news for a change." He stood up to shake my hand. "You're a lucky man, Mr. Davis." I was thrilled. The doctor had just told me that the spot on the X-ray was nothing. Relief came over me like cool water on a hot day. I shook his hand again, struggling to find the words to express my gratitude. The big man smiled and reached into his desk drawer to pull out an envelope. "Here's the rest of the bill for our work. I hope you will feel that the money was not wasted. If you pay the receptionist on your way out, it will save us from having to send the bill home to you. I don't think you want us to do that." He left. I don't want to use all those hackneyed clichés about walking on air. Suffice it to say that I left Masterson's office in a happier mood than I had been in a long, long time. At first, I simply enjoyed the relief, but soon a new thought struck me: I need to get to work on rebuilding my marriage immediately. I need to show her how much I love her. I need to stop taking her for granted. By the time I got back to the office, I had a whole list of things I wanted to do. Luckily, there was nothing on the schedule for the weekend, so I was free to have a blast. I started taking notes Friday night: flowers, takeout from that little Mediterranean restaurant, and loves, a bubble bath, new sheets on the bed. I'm going to make tonight all about Saturday: breakfast in bed, a trip to the spa, more flowers, reservations at the best restaurant in town, a full body oil massage, and then the sex we had when we were first married. I smiled happily. This is going to be good, as I expected, and didn't get home until 7 o'clock from the zoning committee meeting. Staggering, she walked into the living room and sank down on the couch. "I'm tired," she moaned. "I don't know if I can cook tonight." Suddenly, her head came up. "What is that delightful smell?" Then she looked around and noticed a flower arrangement in a vase on the coffee table. Where did those flowers come from? I walked over to the couch and knelt down beside her, smiling broadly. "These beautiful flowers are for my beautiful wife, and what you're feeling is dinner already prepared and waiting." She looked at me in amazement and then grabbed the vase. "These are beautiful," she exclaimed. "Let's take them to the dining room so I can enjoy them at dinner." I hurried into the kitchen to prepare her plate, and by the time she took her seat, everything was ready. Then I slipped a clean towel over my arm and showed her the bottle of her favorite wine I had chilled in the refrigerator. "Would you care for a glass, my lady?" She nodded gratefully, and when our glasses were filled, we began to eat. After a few minutes, she set her fork aside. "This is wonderful. You haven't done anything like this in a long time. To what do I owe such luxurious treatment?" Then her face darkened. "Have you done something you feel guilty about?" I knew this question would follow. "Yes," I said boldly. "I've neglected you for far too long. You've been working like a Trojan, doing the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs, And I've been so consumed with my work that I haven't taken the time to appreciate you. I'm lucky to have you as my wife, and I'm going to make sure you know that I feel that way." She sat like that for a moment, and then her face spread into a smile. "We really did neglect each other, didn't we?" Then she lowered her eyes and gestured toward the table. "Is there anything else?" "Sure," I said enthusiastically. "After dinner, I'll run you a bubble bath, and you can soak as long as you want to relieve all the pain. Then I'll tuck you into bed so you'll get a good night's sleep." I grinned. "You're going to need it because I have more planned for tomorrow." I haven't seen a smile like that from her in a long time. Later, when she climbed under the covers after her bath, she stared at me in surprise. "Is that new bedding?" she inquired, running her fingers over the pillow cover. "The finest cotton with the highest thread count I could find," I smugly answered her. "Now lie back and enjoy happy dreams." She gave me another grateful smile and closed her eyes as I turned out the light and closed the bedroom door. When I went to see her a couple of hours later, she didn't even move. The next morning, she was still asleep when I walked in with a tray laden with eggs Benedict, hashed brown potatoes, and mimosas. "Don't be long," I warned her. "You have a spa appointment at 10 o'clock." She shook her head in surprise. "You spoil me, you know." "I hope you do. You deserve it." "Oh, and after you're done at the spa, why don't you run over to the mall and see if there's anything you'd like to wear to Il Feortino tonight?" She glowered as I came down the stairs. Dinner that night was special. Anne had indeed found a new dress, and when I saw it, I knew I would be lucky to have one. When the waiter brought the bottle of Prosecco I had ordered, I raised my glass in a toast to the beautiful woman, who has made me the luckiest man in the world. She took a sip, then tilted her head questioningly. "Are you sure you're not guilty of anything, Dave? You don't have a mistress somewhere, do you?" I got a twitch because I suspected her of that. "Absolutely not, Cookie. First of all, I take my wedding vows very, very seriously. And second, I could never find anyone I'm more attracted to than you." I took another sip of wine. "And I know you'd never do that to me either." "Never," she said and raised her glass to drink to me in return. Our dinner was excellent, but we skipped dessert so we wouldn't get too full. We finished the second bottle of wine, and both of us giggled lightly as we walked up the stairs hand in hand. When we reached the bedroom, she turned to me and inarticulately asked, "So what's next, my dear husband?" And then we had the best night ever. We had a great time. We both slept in so late that we skipped breakfast and went out for brunch. I intentionally didn't plan anything special for Sunday because I wanted us to have a normal day. After brunch, we came home and did the usual weekend activities and went to the grocery store to restock the refrigerator. I mowed the lawn. After lunch, I sat down at the computer to check email, and Anne went to show the house to a potential buyer who called about one of her listings. It all seemed normal and happy, the way our life together had been. As I drove to work Monday morning, I was in a great mood. The Care for Your Wife project was going great. I felt closer to Anne than I had in months, and I was sure she felt the same way. I even left a special note on our bulletin board: "Cookies are delicious. Cookies are sweet. Cookies, you make my life complete." Pretty corny, I know, but I really felt it at that moment. Work was going smoothly, and I made sure to leave in time to be able to greet Anne when I heard the garage door open. I stood in anticipation and smiled as she came toward me. Slap! She slapped me across the face with all her might, causing me to flinch backward and my ears to ring. "What the hell was that?" I screamed. "You son of a," she screamed at me. "You've been spying on me. You hired a detective agency to spy on me, to photograph my every move. You don't trust me. "Oh man, that's not good," I muttered. She stood with her fists clenched, her face red with anger. "I can't believe you disrespect me so much. Do you have any idea how humiliating it is to find out your husband doesn't trust you?" She paused, to catch her breath. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" What could I say? She was absolutely right. I didn't trust her. I was following her. How could I make it up to her? I stood there like an idiot, desperately trying to think of anything that could save the situation. "But I trust you, Cookie. I know you've been loyal and honest." "You bet, after you've had me by the tail for 2 weeks." Her face contorted even more. "And don't ever call me Cookie again." Again, all I could do was stare blankly at the floor. My silence made her even angrier. "Looks like I was right about this weekend after all. You were only nice to me because you felt guilty about what you'd done." "No, Anne, that's not true," I began, but she interrupted me. "Well, if you didn't feel guilty, you damn well should have." Tears of rage flowed from her eyes as she looked at me. "I've never been treated so horribly in my life. And to have it done by my own husband."